So today's guest is Mr. Inderjit Singh, founder of UTAC, one of the world's largest semiconductor assembly and testing companies, and TriStar Electronics, one of the largest electronics distributor in Africa. He's also a former member of parliament for Ang Mo Kio GRC. Few Singaporeans embody the spirit of both enterprise and public service the way that he does. At the height of the Asian financial crisis, he mortgaged his house to start companies that will go on to become global players. And while still running them, he spent nearly 2 decades in parliament, working to make Singapore a better place for entrepreneurs and ordinary citizens alike, always guided by the belief that growth must ultimately serve people. He's known for speaking his mind, being one of Singapore's sharpest critics, yet also one of his fiercest believers. Because beneath every tough question he asks, is the conviction that Singapore can always rise to new heights if it keeps its can-do spirit alive. So welcome, Mr. Inderjit.
Thank you, Ken Chong.
I think we can start off a bit with a wildcard question. What important truths do very few people agree with you on?
What do very few people agree with me on?
Yeah, what important truths?
I think one of the biggest battle I fought in Parliament, let's say, was how we grow the economy, whether we grow at all costs or whether we have an inclusive growth strategy.
Yeah.
And so this is one thing that I spent many years, fighting for the right balance. So I think that is one thing. There are many people who still believe that no, go for all growth. In fact, I read recently comments from some of our ministers. They say we're going to go for growth at all costs again.
I see.
At all costs means it costs of the people, which is something that I don't agree, because people will get left behind, and so we are seeing some of the effects. So I would say that is a main thing. I mean, the other one was on giving everyone an opportunity. When towards the end of my parliamentary stint, I started talking about hope and opportunity. If our young Singaporeans don't see this, why would they want to treat this as a home? We don't want this to become a hotel. We want people to treat it as home.
Yeah.
But in a home, you must see hope and opportunity.
Yeah.
So this is another thing that I believed a lot. And so many of the things that I used to do in Parliament and now is how to create that opportunity and a bit of a balance and not so much of I would say inequality. So I think these are the two areas that I'm very passionate about.
We'll continue touching upon this theme throughout the conversation. But I think before we go into the politics side of things, I would love to hear a bit about your background. Because I think before you started UTAC, you started a silicon salvage project in TI where you reuse all the discarded silicon that failed internal test standards for other applications to generate a $230 million per year business for the company. So you're clearly very deeply entrepreneurial. What was your biggest influence that made you so entrepreneurial? And were there signs since young?
Growing up, my background from we were a poor family. My father was a watchman in a factory. I spent 20 years of my life growing up. So we had a tough life. So it was a lot about survival and getting out of that level of lifestyle that we had. And so for me, to do that, then you really have to do things differently from others. I was fortunate that I did very well in school, primary school, but instead of choosing RI, I decided to go to neighborhood school. Yeah, I could have gone to RI, I did not, right? So then after O-levels, I could have gone to established colleges at that time. I chose to go to a brand new college, Temasek Junior College. So I was a pioneer batch down there. Okay. So when you're a pioneer, you got the chance to experience doing things from scratch.
Yes.
Almost entrepreneurial, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then went on to military. I learned that it's all about mindset.
Yes.
Tough training that we went through those days.
Yeah.
And if you want to go through 2.5 years of tough training, you really have to have the right mindset. I started with the wrong mindset. I suffered, changed my mindset. I did very well. I wrote a bit of it in my book about this story, So it was mindset. So this is my second experience. And then when I started university, I went to NUS. I wanted to do engineering.
Yeah.
Went to NUS. After our first year, we were asked to decide whether you want to go to NTI, 75% went there, or remain in NUS. I was very passionate about doing electrical engineering. I ended up going to NTI. In NTI, I was a pioneer also. So again, entrepreneurial thinking, right? I started the Students' Union down there.
Yeah.
Started the Triple E Club and many other things we started from scratch.
Wow.
So I would say that is my background
Yeah.
before I even started work. Right, that I've got the pioneering entrepreneurial experiences from young, and then in school and in university.
How did you decide to start, like, I think, like this young, right? Because I think even, let's say, when you were very early, when you made a choice between a neighborhood school and not a lot of people would have made the choice that you made. What drove that decision?
You know, these days, because my children also, right, we looked at which school they go to, we want to go for good schools, right? Those days, I think my parents, we were more of which is nearby, where our siblings are.
Yeah.
That was the main decision.
Oh.
And so did not look at I must go to elite school and do well. Did not. And then, by the way, my parents had no basic education. They came from India, no basic education.
Wow.
So they were not people who read. Like now we think differently, but they did not. Like for them, education, good Singapore. Any school is a good school for even those days, right? For them. So so it worked out, I guess, so that was a choice we made. So when you go to these places, you learn how to adapt and be the best you are, not to be maybe the best student in school.
No, but I think you really leave the maximum of like every school is a good school, even back then.
Yeah. So the other thing on the silicon salvage you mentioned, right? That's a name I gave by the project I created.
Yes.
Maybe I talk a bit about my experience in TI. So when I was in my third year in NTI, we used to have to do a 6 months industrial attachment program. NUS normal program was 3 months, but 6 months is a long time. So I went to Texas Instruments to do it. First day I went down there, my boss told me, I'm going to give you this project, programming by the coding. I started writing programs to test DRAMs, ICs. He said, I'm going to give you this project. It's very difficult. Our engineers have not been able to solve it.
Yeah.
Why don't you take it? After 6 months, if you can't finish, we'll hand it over to an engineer after you leave. So I'm still a student. In 3 months, I completed the project. and they didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
So I started automating their library and other software projects that I did.
Wow.
Before graduation, it was a recession year, they offered me a job. And throughout my engineering, and I'm an analytical thinker, right, engineer, as an engineer, I have one philosophy that I believe is that there's no problem that cannot be solved. So that is a mantra that I believe.
Yeah.
And so I look beyond the norm that people look at. So when I was in Texas Instruments, I was solving engineering problems that other engineers could not solve. So I had to move one department to another. And in 13 years, I did 9 different jobs.
Wow.
Lateral, promotions, and at the end, I was running the whole operation in Singapore.
Yeah.
But when I was mid-level engineer, the company was losing a lot of money. DRAMs, lots of losses. They form a worldwide quality improvement team to how to improve profitability.
Right.
So I came from operations.
Yeah.
There were marketing people, there were strategy people. So we all met every quarter to discuss how to improve profitability. Everyone expected me from operations to talk about how to improve yields, how to improve productivity, how to reduce cost of operations.
Yeah.
So I started looking at the numerator rather than denominator cost. I look at how can I create new revenue.
Yeah, new revenue lines. Yeah.
I was an expert in testing, right? And we were testing DRAMs that at very tight conditions that will be able to run in missiles and we applicable in spaceships.
Yeah.
But we were changing our computers every 5 years maybe. So if I could reduce my testing parameters, I can use this in computers, in telephones, in answering machines.
Yeah.
So I thought about new applications.
Yeah.
And whether I can make revenue out of rejects that we are throwing away. So, and I was inspired by the rag and bone men, or karanguni men, as they call in Singapore. These are the people who collect trash.
Yes.
And they became very rich, Rolex watches, big cars and so on.
Yeah.
So I was inspired how to convert trash into treasure. So that was my inspiration that, can I do this? And when I made a presentation in one of these quarterly meetings, 2/3 of the room laughed at me. But there was one Japanese boss who was quite high up and he allowed me to continue with this project. So when you do something different that people don't believe, there were a lot of naysayers and they'll laugh at you. But I pressed on, and then, the rest is history. I created this business that became a norm. In fact, in the industry, many of them started looking at creating revenue out of rejects.
At this central thread of you believing that anything can be done, right?
Yeah.
Like, when do you start to have this realization? Was it in engineering?
First of all, when I did my OCS, in the army, tough things, I started, as I say, hating it, performed badly, change of mindset, and I could do a good job. Became one of the top in my platoon, from bottom to the top. So that was one thing that kind of. But then I think the most important, of course, is my engineering education, which is we solve problems.
Yeah.
And so I think that became the foundation for me. I practiced it in Texas Instruments.
Yep.
And then subsequently, all my whatever I did,
And I think this carried over into UTAC as well, because I think you mentioned that the reason why UTAC stood out was that you value added to your clients by analyzing not just testing, but also analyzing why the tested products fail. So what was it about this that other players might have missed or end up not doing that gave an opening for UTAC?
I would say that, as I said, I started my career in Texas Instrument testing products and so on. So I could understand where they fail, why they fail. All right. And so this is, it's called failure analysis. You don't just test and then accept the failure. You want to understand why it failed. So I went into very deep understanding of why it failed. So, and I had assembled a team from Texas Instruments who were like that. We understood the product. We understand everything, not just what we do on the surface, but the depth of it. And so I had one example. So this is TI Acer had a semiconductor company joint venture in Taiwan. And I went all the way there to offer UTAC services I met with the president of the company. And I offered him my services. My price was higher than what the Taiwanese service providers were providing. He told Inderjit, you are more expensive than these guys. How are you going to get my business? I told him the difference is I'll be able to solve the problems that these people cannot solve. And then I got the business actually. So this value add is beyond just what everyone else does. So in UTAC, that is what we did in throughout. It was value add that we did better than others. Don't just do the service, but go beyond that and offer that to the customer. Delight the customers. So in just in 3 years, we had 38 blue chip customers. I had customers who moved from Stats, which is the government-owned, over to me. Broadcom, for example, was a big customer that just shifted over because our reputation became that we were providing a lot of value and it was worth doing. So we had good Fujitsu, Siemens, Broadcom, and like good customers.
So this analyzing that you did in terms of like how did these products like fail, was this something that other companies could not?
Of course, they could. They could. So back to my silicon salvage, right? That I could have just gone down there and talked about how I can improve yields and productivity and do better operator. But I looked at it differently. So all these other service providers, they are probably looking at, I just provide you this service, you give me your test program, I provide this service, I return back the pass and the fail goods to you. But I went beyond that. But same mindset with me and my team, we looked at, that don't just do what everyone else can do. And then let's do this. Even if let's say customers don't pay, but we want to go beyond and we give them enough information that can help them improve their products. Because the design and wafer fab is theirs. We do the end part of it. So more information we give them, the more valuable they see us. Everyone could have done it, but I think the mindset was, they are paying us for this, we just do this.
When you add on this layer of analysis and I think understanding of like why the products fail, like how in terms of the customers, how did they benefit? Is it like improvement in terms of yield?
Yes. So we could advise them that actually if you change some of the test parameters, or if we were building for it, we would tell if you change some of the material content of this thing, you're going to have better yields and then your profitability can go up. Or let's say we identify what went wrong, and then they can go back. So we are the end stage. Wafer fabs are before us, wafer fab process. And then before that is a designing of the chip. So these 3 steps, right? IP, design, wafer fab, and so we. At the end, we could provide them information what they could change in the process in the wafer fab, what they could change even in the future design that they do. So this will give them robust products that can win in the market and will save them costs also if they don't have so many rejects at the end.
I see. Oh, that's really interesting.
I had in-depth knowledge. My team that I brought in had in-depth. I trained many of them who came and joined me in UTAC, and so so we all had that kind of in-depth, and we used it as value add. And,
so you really understood like what the entire chain of like the process
we
was.
understood. When we were in Texas Instruments, the team, we were already doing R&D and in the packaging area. So I had a team people who joined me also. So we went into that kind of a depth. So not just production, but R&D also. And in fact, my team in Singapore, together with the team in Japan and the US, there was a team that did a lead on chip package design.
Yeah.
We got the Ichimura prize given by the Emperor of Japan to us. I still have that prize at home. Yeah, so so we went to that level. So we had the expertise and so that helped us a lot as we moved on. We helped customers design packages.
Yes.
They just told us, "I've got these wafers.
Yep.
Can you do the packaging?" We designed that for them also. So it was very we went very deep
throughout this whole process. I think the whole UTAC journey was like mind blowing. I think when I first read about it, there was this one I think key episode, SGX and Nasdaq listing, whereby essentially SGX closed the door on you, but after Nasdaq gave the green light, SGX said yes. Did SGX give you a reason like why they didn't want to list your company?
No, I understood why they, but that's where they tried to do catalyst later on. I think at that time there wasn't a catalyst; there was only one board. So Nasdaq basically will look at potentially high growth companies, tech companies that can grow very fast. So that's that's a mindset down there. Even if you're not profitable today, but you have the potential, they allow. The SGX guideline at that time was you must already be profitable for 3 years. But my company was just about 3 years old. We were already profitable from second year onwards, but revenue is small. So I think they did not see the potential. They just look at the past data. Nasdaq look at the potential also, past data plus potential also.
Yes.
So when we, it was amazing numbers. We were growing very very fast, and so when they closed the door, of course, we then went to Nasdaq. We actually spent a lot of money, and Nasdaq approved. After Nasdaq approved, then SGX came to me. They found out. And see whether can we do a joint listing, with a wrap around. That means we don't have to do the additional work of preparing the prospectus. That's a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah.
They will just use the Nasdaq prospectus and then just add their cover page and say you're also listing in Singapore. So we agreed to do that. So I would say that the system at that time was, you must have track record of profitability and must be very big. They did not look at the way Nasdaq potential high growth tech companies. We were there.
Yeah.
So we got they recognize SGX. And I think Catalyst was meant to do that in Singapore, but I don't think so. They have succeeded. So because we don't see that kind of companies on. Catalyst yet.
Do you hear anything about what happened in terms of the machinations behind like why they decided to change? Is it like the main driving force was just that SGX heard that Nasdaq gave the green light and they were like, okay, let's completely change operation in terms of your company?
It was right because I think when they saw the valuations that we were able to get, and that time was a tech boom also, right? And and so they didn't want to lose out on a local company going completely to Nasdaq. It would have been not a nice thing also, embarrassment also, right? That the Singapore company had to go to Nasdaq and so let's say it had been the joint listing. It would have been nice for everyone. So I think that was maybe what drove them, but I won't know what the inside thing is.
Understand. You also mentioned in your book that and interviews as well that about 38 million, I think, from the 138 million that you raised came from, I think, Singapore investors. I think you don't have to name any names, but were there like Singapore stakeholders or investors that maybe switched sides when some investors tried to get out of their stakes? Like what exactly happened there in terms of the terrible event?
When I had to leave? So I mentioned and you also had in your video that you did was about how conflict of interest came in with some of these players. But yes, unfortunately there were big Singapore players, government owned, who switched sides.
Wow.
Okay, but it's got to do with personalities, and I think maybe that should be sufficient. I mean, this battle could have been fought better, but I think I was left to fight it on my own.
I see. And considering the fact that I think the circumstances and there were Singapore funds involved, do you have a chance, I think, since that incident happened, to get back control of your company? Like, did they approach you? Were there opportunities?
To UTAC?
To go back to UTAC and hit the company again?
No, I had moved on and I started my next company, Infiniti Solutions, which I sold in 2015. I moved on and I wouldn't have gone back.
I see.
Because the controlling stakeholders are the same. Right? So why fight battles, unnecessary battles? So I did not think about it. Neither did they approach me.
I see.
I had laid such great foundations that the company just went on the momentum and went to list after I left on SGX, right?
Yes.
So didn't have to do a lot, but the hard work was already done by me. But I laid strong foundations. Yeah.
And in your book as well, I think in the very, very early days of like UTAC, you mentioned that government agencies actually give you like a hard time.
Oh, very tough.
Yeah, could you maybe elaborate on that? I think especially for the younger audience and all this, like to better appreciate how things were back then and how things have changed.
Put it simply, the mentality, and it exists today also, is an MNC support strategy. And many a times, EDB has lots of resources. They've got the best people, they got a lot of money, and they are given the task to support economic development. When it comes to companies like UTAC, which is a tech company with a lot of investment, Enterprise Singapore, or at that time was Spring Singapore, they were not allowed to handle. EDB wanted the best cakes and left the maybe not the greatest one in terms of type of potential companies to the rest of the agencies. But then when you have the people in EDB thinking MNC mindset, the support is mainly for mindset, and they just don't know how to support local companies. So that mindset, I think, still partially exists, may improve a bit, but we have to watch this very, very, very carefully. So that was the problem at that time, that I'm not a multinational, I'm a local Singapore company. No one believed that. I did a press conference after I raised the funds and before we started, that we are starting UTAC, we'll spend $500 million in Singapore.
Yes.
Factory, equipment, people.
Yeah.
And by the way, UTAC did spend more than $500 million. I announced that, was in the papers. Everyone was shocked, including EDB. Where did this come from? And I think that was another thing, that why wasn't EDB involved? They thought that, we must go through them, but no, I did it on my own without any support. So subsequently, I had a lot of trouble from some of these government agencies that I fought many battles. Being an MP did not help me. It was worse because I cannot use my position for benefit. So mine was purely a private fight, and I had to do lots of. I'll give you one example. So one of the things that I did in UTAC, which I also was in charge in Texas Instruments, we did R&D. There are R&D grants that the government gives. Right. So when I was in Texas Instruments, I may apply for a $5 million grant or for $5 million research. Share with them. I get officers from EDB telling me, "Why don't you take 10 million and do a bit more?" When I did the same thing in UTAC and I went to EDB and asked for this kind of grant, I want to maybe a $2 million research grant. They say, no, we only will give you 20% of what you spend.
I see.
Not, why didn't you take 4 million, double,
Yeah.
So I had that kind of reaction from them because they didn't believe that we'll do it. 20%, all the effort to do reporting, I told the EDB officer who came, I said, forget it, government can keep the money. I will still do my R&D, but without government help.
Wow.
And we went on and we did all of those things. So UTAC did a lot of new package development and so on.
Yeah.
So it's an example. When I wanted to do things in my factory that I bought, Micropolis went bankrupt, I bought over the factory, wanted to use it because now I needed a 250,000 square feet building, and I was not going to occupy all in one day. It take me years to build up. But I bought a 400,000 square feet building. I had a lot of space, sitting idle. Government regulation says that, you only can allow 20% or 30%. I can't remember. The rest you must use. But I was going to use 20, 30%. I wanted to lease out the rest to make some money for they did not allow. Cannot, 20%. You must stick to the rules and so on. So these kind of rules are wrong. I'm starting up. At the end, in fact, even that 400,000 square building was not enough, right? They went on and they had to buy other building, move to other building. But it takes time. So the civil servants need to think about where the trajectory is going, and then just support. Nothing wrong because I have empty space. Leave it idle is a waste for everyone. So I had to fight battles like that.
Wow.
So many battles like this.
And it was not just those two. Like
there are many more. So funding to not getting good support from government agencies like EDB, and then this building thing and so on. That was my experience, and that's why I said, when I became an MP, I'm going to fight for entrepreneurs,
Yes.
for SMEs.
Yeah.
I spent 20 years doing that in Parliament because I had a personal experience
Yes.
and we had to change things.
Wow.
So that is why I did all the things that I did in Parliament.
I see. And even this, I think 30 million, I think initially you said the Singapore investors put. You said that initially they turned you away and only after you got the Taiwanese
Correct.
money.
I could not get any Singapore money. I could not. So I went to Taiwan. Fortunately, I had good Taiwanese friends who, through my past networks in TI. So they had arranged for me to do a road show. I took 1 day leave from Texas Instruments, went there, one room full of 50 or 60 people, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
And I made a presentation. Only my name was there, and I told them the people who were going to join me, Mr. A, Mr. B, and their background, but I could not reveal because they were all working Texas Instruments, right?
Yeah.
So, but then they were very, willing. Tech was booming. They wanted to get into the ag.
Yeah.
And I had more money than I needed. My goal was 100 million.
Yeah.
More than I needed. I said, Singapore company. Unless I can get at least 30% ownership from Singapore, I'm not going to start. I don't want to. It should not be a foreign company. So I got about 15 to 20% from me and my team, which we pay later before IPO. Then after that, came back. They found out I've raised so much of money. Then they came and they wanted in. And of course, I say I need 100.
Yeah.
Why not some more? And so we took $138 million at one go.
Yeah. Wow.
Record at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that even let's say even if you extrapolate to today, right, whereby you have Singapore-based funds that are trying to invest in local companies and trying to help them scale, I think a very big problem in the local ecosystem is that there's actually not a lot of suitable candidates in which you can put a lot of money into.
Yes.
So was this something that they shared as a consideration to you? Because I imagine that back then there was only a few, I think, companies that grew to your scale. So why weren't they more willing to, I guess, take a bet on you? Did they share any reasons?
Okay. I mean, you see, we had very few examples. Sim Wong Hu was a great example before me. Right? I mean, he was one who inspired many entrepreneurs in Singapore. So, but there were very few examples like him. So someone like me came from a multinational. No one believed that you can do it, right? So I think the ability to spot talent was not there among these people.
Yeah.
But then when we started speaking about it, government realized the need. They spent $1 billion starting the Technology Innovation Fund, which invested in VCs to bring VCs into Singapore that will then invest in Singapore companies. So that came later because this was not happening. I think one of the thing that had inspired that would have been my experience. That money had to come from outside. If let's say we have it down here, with government support. So I'm sure there are other examples also, but I think that kind of got them to think that we have to change. And today we got lots of funds here in Singapore, government funds and so on.
Maybe let's move on a bit and talk a bit about, I think, like Singapore. I think in the semiconductor ecosystem that you were in, right? I think a lot of viewers who watch the channel would be aware that Singapore started Chartered Semiconductors as well as STATS. Chartered Semiconductors, maybe let's start with that, which is a TSMC competitor with a foundry model. And I think maybe the question here is, like, considering how important founders are, right, with Maurice Cheng at TSMC and how successful you made UTAC to be despite naysayers. If you were leading Chartered Semiconductor with all the information that you know, what would you have potentially done?
Okay, this is I'm sure some of the people who will listen to this will be upset. There's a strategic error that the I would say the board or maybe even Temasek made. Was that both Chartered Semiconductor is a technology company, deep tech. Deep tech. Sometimes you have to invest a lot of money, and you will show a loss in your P&L statement.
Yep.
And but question is, you see that money as cost or as an investment for the future.
Yeah.
All right. I think this is where whoever was involved could not see it that as an investment, and TSMC continued to invest.
Yep.
They all were almost the same, invest, and they move up the technology ladder.
Yeah.
Chartered, I believe, and I mean they can tell a better story than me, is that they did not invest in technology the way they should have, because they must have looked at it as a cost. And the other thing is that the CEO that they appointed to Chartered was a finance person, not a technology person, not an engineer. So he's a good man. I know him, but he does not understand tech.
Mm.
And the decision, then him and the board could have made that, I'm guessing, wrong decision of not investing in the right technology to keep up. And I think that's where, then they lost one generation of technology to TSMC, USMC.
Yeah.
And they felt that it's too late to catch up, and that's when they sold off. So I would have invested in technology, seen it as investment, not as cost. I would have put a technology man as a person in charge and have more technology people on the board, less finance people on the board.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the strategic error that happened in Chartered. So it's a pity we lost it. Global Foundries is successful now, right? I think Abu Dhabi base, they are moving on, and that was a jewel that we lost.
Success in, I think, this government-led initiatives are actually not given. I think even, let's say, with Global Foundries, for instance, they still not managed to, I think, be at the very frontier of, I think, the semiconductor production, I think, behind Samsung as well as TSMC. Yeah. So it's not just a matter of, in terms of pouring vast amounts of money, because the backers of Global Foundries have some of the largest backers in the world. So it's arguable whether capital itself is just a limitation. So what do you think was missing in terms of that leap for something like Chartered Semiconductors? Could Singapore have initiated a strategy like that of like acquiring a lot more semiconductor companies, like what Global Foundries did? Or was it that they should have invested a lot more into tech? Maybe we can get a bit technical here, because we miss a leap in terms of the technological frontier, in terms of, I think, TSMC and Samsung invested into ASML and the EUV technology, right? Yeah. I don't think that Chartered Semiconductor was involved in that. Was that like the crucial mistake almost?
I think it was a very crucial mistake, because that is how it allowed those who invested to move up that one generation ahead of new tech in processing. I mean, wafer fab costs of producing a wafer is very expensive. So the processes that you do that are efficient, that do not take a lot of processes, and you still can come up with a good wafer, that I think is a call down there. So so ASML or any other process research that you do was very important for you to stay ahead of the curve. And so I'm not so sure about Chartered, whether they did it or not. I mean, they may have missed that, and therefore they could not catch up. So you are right. Instead of selling, maybe acquiring. Acquiring design companies. Acquiring not big companies, but those who in the forefront of research. That could have been a better strategy than to just sell off at a cheap price, I think. So acquiring, because they did not invest, they could have acquired.
Yeah,
that is definitely a good strategy.
The fact that you understand, I think, the whole chain with your work at UTAC, for instance. I think one of the key considerations for, I think, any design companies, for instance, NVIDIA or MediaTek, for instance, in different economies, let's say Hong Kong, is that you need a very strong, almost domestic electronics industry. Do you think that we could have made the move out to a value chain in terms of moving into chip design and IP? Like, how do you see that playing out?
I think that is another thing that did not work out well for Singapore. So when I was in Texas Instruments, I was running the operation. Even before I ran the whole operation, it was just manufacturing, packaging, and testing. I put up a case for us to bring design of IC design into Singapore. Worked very hard with the management in the US. I think if, let's say, we had got good government incentives for this, maybe we would have had a chance. Guess who did we lose out to? We lost to Bangalore, India. So TI placed their design center in India, and they did very well on that, by the way. I used to fly down there to go and audit their designs so that they are ready for production in the future. Big teams, thousands of design engineers and so on. So we should have done a lot of work in this area of design. I think there was an attempt, but not enough investment. So we lost. So design, process engineering in wafer fabs, that's another big area of investment or equipment, right? So these are the things that go to the ancillary areas that fit into the system that could have also helped us. And so I think these are the things that we lost sight. And there was another reason was, I think I've said it before somewhere in my speeches, that we have the economic planning process through EDB, where they do research on what are the future techs that are coming.
Yeah.
And then, spend some time teaching, building the infrastructure, and then going to that UTAC. I think there was a bit of this also, miscalculation on the government agency side that the next big thing is going to be photonics or life sciences, and less focus on these are maturing, semiconductor electronics maturing.
Yeah.
So we start shifting focus. My assessment is that government economic planning abandoned semiconductors for future things that we did not really take off in photonics. We never really took off. Life sciences, I think we are doing okay, but local companies, not many. Pharmaceutical, they're all here.
Yeah.
Just the MNC. So it was always a MNC mentality that in most of economic planning approach. So we abandoned, and so did not invest enough even from the government side.
What made you have this impression? Was this communicated to you, or were there like signs that you picked
the
up
signs were there. I could see that we have regular meetings and regular seminars, and they talk about what's next, right? It's a long-term planning, what's next. So if you make a wrong assessment, you lose it. I would have thought that we go deeper rather than go to the next technology or next big thing.
Yeah.
Semiconductor, we have got strength, we got capability, go deeper and deeper and deeper, like what Taiwan did, Samsung did.
Yeah.
Right? But Korea, by the way, was far behind us. When I was in Texas Instruments, Hyundai wanted to start DRAMs. They used Texas Instruments taught them. I was tasked to go and qualify their production line.
Yes.
I went there and they were so far behind us. This was like maybe late 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
And today they have overtaken. So they went deeper and deeper, and they became very big. So I think we don't have that. So who are the decision makers who did not decide to go deeper? I think when government agencies, so they are not pure private. Isn't it? Chartered Semiconductors, that's not pure private.
Yes.
So there's a lot of influence, even at the board level, that you don't have the right people down there. So that is our problem.
You mentioned, for instance, when you try to get TI to transfer some of its, I think, chip design capabilities to Singapore, there was, I think, some hurdle there. And I would love to delve a bit deeper into this because when you look at, let's say, the industrial strategy of Singapore, I think when you look at, let's say, whether it's Taiwan or it's Korea, there was always a deliberate decision to have some form of technological transfer agreements with all these, I think, semiconductor companies. Whereas, let's say, for instance, when I read about Chartered Semiconductor's partnership with Sierra, right, we were actually not able to get the foremost technology to be transferred to Singapore. I think Sierra transferred their foremost, but the others, in terms of the partnership, we didn't manage to get that. We may not have the bargaining power of those other countries because of our limited size, right? So do you think that there's something that could have been shifted in terms of how we actually embark on our industrial policy in this aspect?
Of course. I think if, let's say, you wanted to focus on creating the future multinationals of Singapore, then you would have gone out of your way, give the incentives to keep them down here. I'll give you one example of where the MNC mentality played out, right? Micron technology.
Yes.
This was maybe 2000s, I can't remember. I spoke in Parliament about this. They almost went bankrupt. They had like few months of money left. And thanks to EDB, loaned them, I think, $200 million, $300 million. It was quite big at that time.
Wow.
To keep them afloat.
In Singapore?
In Singapore. To keep them, I think the money, how they use was up to them.
Yeah.
But keep them afloat. But the condition was you have to future expand in Singapore. Do more wafer fab, which they did, by the way. So it was a multinational support.
Yeah.
So imagine, let's say I take these $200 or $300 million and I gave to Chartered to go and get technology transferred to you.
Yeah.
Give incentives to these fellas. I'll fund you. It could have been different. Correct?
Yeah.
So this is only one example of multinational mindset. And which until today we do that. All the pharmaceutical company, all multinationals. It's driving our economy.
Yeah.
But Singapore-based multinational that are becoming big, not many. Those that are there are still ST, Singapore Technologies, engineering, those government owned that, but we did not have that kind of. So until today, I think we don't have that approach that we do with MNC for the local. I've seen it throughout my 20 years.
That's a very, I think, stunning example in terms of, I think, the disparity in terms of mindset, in terms of what course of action they took. If let's say you're in the position of Temasek, I imagine that given the semiconductor industry's cyclical nature, right, and Charlie Semiconductor, I would imagine, is a drag in terms of their overall portfolio returns, right? It would have potentially made sense to let go of Charlie Semiconductor if you were just
Pure financial decision.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a strategic decision, right?
Yes, exactly. So if you were in their position, would anything have changed your mind?
Of course, we'll have to have a board that also has got enough technologies and people who understand the industry that this is going to be a jewel of the future.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you go on pure financial, so they did that with Chartered, they did that with Stats. Also, those were all sold off. And I think to Amcor, I can't remember who Stats went to, but yes. So I think, you see, I started UTAC at a time where people say it's impossible to have a semiconductor company in Singapore at that scale. Right? So people gave up on having manufacturing facilities in Singapore. But I believe that it could be done and it can last a long time. It's still here.
Yes.
Lasted a long time. Right? So the mindset at that time, is lost cost. Let's not base any more money. And so that's a mindset difference, right? So I think if, let's say, they had the right people looking at the long-term vision, not interference from the strategic planners in the government side who see that, we better shift to pharmaceuticals, shift to this thing, and we may not want to waste so much of time on it.
Yeah.
Things would have been different.
Were you involved in any discussions about this in terms of the shifting, considering that you are one of the leading experts in Singapore in the semiconductor industry?
Post UTAC, no. Before that, when I was in TI, initial part of UTAC, I was involved in a number of things. But, I was involved in the economic restructuring committee that was started after the 2001 elections.
Yeah.
It was a very big exercise. I was actively involved. I was chairing one of the committees also.
Yeah.
And one of the big recommendations I made, which was adopted, was entrepreneurship-driven economy.
Yep.
This is was my committee's recommendation.
Yes.
And also reduce government involvement in businesses that private sector can do.
Yep.
That was another recommendation that we made.
Yeah.
Simply because when the government gets involved, then the decision making are influenced by government.
For sure.
So if purely private sector driven, then I think we have, like UTAC, for example, purely private sector driven.
Yes.
We were very successful.
Understand.
So I was involved at that level. But beyond that, after that, all my involvement was in Parliament.
Yeah.
And I think with all my speeches in Parliament, many of the civil servants were unhappy with me and did not engage me. But I did one thing. I had problem finding money.
Yeah.
So I wanted to change the financing landscape in Singapore.
Yeah.
So this is even before the Economic Restructuring Committee work.
Yeah.
98, I could not find money. I became an MP. And I said, I want to solve this problem. And I was on the board of Spring Singapore. And what I did was, I gathered a group of volunteers.
Yeah.
Bankers, VCs, entrepreneurs, maybe 15 or 16 of us.
Yeah.
Secretariat was Spring because I got them to. And I started looking at how can we improve financing of SMEs and startups. And I traveled around the world.
Yes.
I went to Silicon Valley, I went to Canada, I went to Japan, Korea, Taiwan. I looked at all the things. And when some people in the government found out, like MTI found out about it, Inderjit is heading this committee and we don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
So the civil servants asked Spring to ask Inderjit to invite them into the committee. Their idea was to come down here and try to discourage me from doing this because it's not government initiated.
Yeah.
It was completely my initiative.
Yeah.
Of course, for me, we all worked together. I invited them. No matter how much they tried, I pushed it through.
Yeah.
And finally came out with a set of recommendations.
Yes.
So interestingly, the Economic Review Committee was moving and I was involved. And then someone heard about my work.
Yeah.
Our current president, Tharman, but he was one of the deputy to Lee Hsien Loong when they did this Economic Strategy Committee. He called me and said, Inderjit, I heard that you're working on something for financing, because we knew financing was tough.
Yeah.
He said, can you present to me?
Yeah.
So I told him, okay, I'll present. So I went to present to him.
Oh, that's great.
He looked at all the recommendations that I came out with. He said, these are fantastic, actionable items.
Yeah.
He said, in the ERC, very few actionable items. There are many broad statements, but actionable. So I told him, thank you so much. I will complete my report.
Yeah.
Can you please get a group of civil servants to be the implementation committee for what I've suggested? So we have many recommendations. You can dig up the report.
Yeah.
He laughed at me and he said, Inderjit, you want to implement this? You chair the implementation committee. Otherwise, you'll get killed. So these are the kind of thing. He also knew, smart man. And so I chaired the implementation committee. At the same time, we formed Action Committee for Entrepreneurship, which was one recommendation we made.
Yeah.
So Raymond Lim was chairman. I was one of the founding with a group of people. And we formed Crucibles,
Yeah.
internationalization, culture, education,
Yeah.
and one on finance.
Mm.
So he told me to chair the finance crucible.
Oh.
So I moved my SME financing committee into Action Crucible for Finance.
Yeah.
So I did next few works on implementing some of the things through that. That's the history of it. And I can say, when I could not find money,
Yeah.
I dare say that today, there's a lot of money, but not enough good projects. If you cannot get the financing, there must be something wrong with you or your team or your idea. Go and revise it.
Right.
You will be able to find money because we've got lots of funds on the angels and big funds and so on.
Yeah.
So we completely transformed the environment. I cannot take credit for this. The government also involved.
For sure.
They started with a $1 billion fund and they started pushing in many areas. Action ACE did a lot of things.
Yeah.
So but that was the beginning.
Yes.
After my difficulty, I wanted to do this. ACE came. ACE helped to project this thing further.
Yeah.
And today the environment has changed.
This collaboration, I think, between yourself and I think the politicians was very important to be able to realize some of these things.
Yes.
And
So that was my. So I wanted to change.
yes.
Because of my experience of difficulty, and I was in a unique position. I knew what to do because I've experienced it,
Yeah.
and I was a bridge with government. I was not the decision maker in government.
Yeah. But you're still an MP then.
I was an MP.
Yeah.
And so I brought some credible voices in Parliament and also outside Parliament
Yeah.
that they consulted me on many of these things that I talked about in Parliament.
Yeah.
That was an opportunity. That's why I say I will not use this opportunity to change, which was my mindset. How can we make Singapore environment transform for SMEs and for... I give you two examples. So I used to give my speeches in a lot of details I used to speak about.
Yeah.
The civil servants are very tired because every time when I give, they had to answer, right, in the budget debate.
Yeah.
But interestingly, there's one man who called me one day.
Ah.
Our finance minister, Mr. Richard Hu, passed away, bless his soul. And he said, Inderjit, you have lots of ideas.
Yeah.
My officers, my civil servants don't have enough ideas.
Yeah.
Can you come to my office and brief them on all your ideas?
Yeah.
So I went to his office. He had all his directors all sitting down there.
Yeah.
And I spent about 2 hours sharing all my ideas. I mean, some were good ideas, some not implementable in government, but I shared whatever I have. So there were people who at least, listened and gave me the opportunity. The other example I can give you is that how to incentivize people to invest in startups.
Yeah.
There was an enterprise investment scheme that was our former Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat. He was the permanent secretary in MTI.
Yeah.
He was in charge of doing that for budget. He calls me one day and said, I want to talk to you about some ideas on how to implement this thing.
Yeah.
He came all the way to my office to meet up with me, and rather than calling me down there. And so we sat down and discussed, and he did a good job.
Yeah.
But at least he consulted, Richard who consulted, Heng Swee Keat consulted. So because I had the experience, they believed what I said. I was not just making noise and trying to show off.
Yeah.
I knew what I was saying. They listened and they gave me an opportunity.
Yes.
So all of these were at the right time that allow us to change many things.
I think all these examples are really useful because you need the collaboration between whether it's the politicians and I think the private sector or other stakeholders to actually come to a consensus as to how to actually move forward.
Of course. Yeah.
And for instance, for the semiconductor example, you mentioned that you could really see signs that the government's in terms of economic planning was really moving away from this. Were there any kind of committee meetings like that or discussions with people like you who are leaders of the semiconductor industry to think about, whether this was actually even the right move?
I don't remember, other than the Economic Review Committee, I don't remember. So in fact, after that they had Economic Strategies Committee, lots of committees that came about that could have done a bit of this work, but I don't remember being consulted for this thing. I think there came a point when they were very tired of listening to my criticism and then, they didn't want to listen anymore. Maybe that's what happened. So no, I was not involved. They may have involved many other people, to be fair to them, but I was not involved forever, at some stage, yes, but and not Richard who believed, Heng Swee Keat believed, but not everyone believed. Raymond Lim believed, so not everyone believed.
And maybe we can talk a bit about stats as well. Because besides Chartered Semiconductor, Singapore also started stats, which is similarly to UTAC, a chip assembly and testing company, which became actually the fourth largest player in the world by revenue. You mentioned that UTAC was able to value it by diagnosing what certain test a chip when they fail. Do you know like what modes did stats have, and like how is it different from UTAC from your perspective?
No, I cannot say that they failed in the areas that we succeeded, but what we succeeded was to bring over some blue chip customers from them to us.
Yes.
So Broadcom, for example, it was a very big company at that point of time.
Yeah.
We managed to convince them, and they switched from. Maybe they did not move everything at first, but then they actually came to us. Similarly, there were some other customers that we managed to get.
Yeah.
So I think we may have provided services that they were happy with.
Yeah.
The support that we gave them was good. We could invest very aggressively.
Yeah.
We decided very fast. Right? I mean, me and my board listened to me at that time.
Yes.
So I think these were all the factors that caused us. I wouldn't say they messed up. But I would say that maybe we did a great job and we were able to pull some of these people over.
Yeah. I would love to hear a bit more, I think, about the dynamics, right? Because I think that you are essentially competing with stats in a sense. Yeah. And stats is actually, I guess, semi-government owned. What were the dynamics like in terms of being in this playing field? I think for most entrepreneurs, when they think they're competing against a government-backed company.
So I think, first of all, when I was planning UTAC, I started planning this in like 95 while I was still in TI.
Yeah.
So I looked at the kind of investment that's needed, and I say, unless I can raise 100 million, I'm not going to start it. That was my goal, 100 million US, because you really need to invest aggressively. Yeah. The capability, the technology, I knew, my team knew.
Yeah.
So we have that. Now it's just a matter of raising enough to be able to put in a plan that can support. So this is something that that we knew that we could do. On the other side, I think the chartered. What's the question?
Competing with stats,
So I could do what the customers wanted. That stat may have legacy systems that will take a long time for them to shift. I could invest in the latest thing. So that was my strength. I had the money. I knew what to invest in, and I could. So I think we were not afraid of it. But I think stats, I believe, was complacent. These guys are going to fail.
I see. They thought that was you.
EDB thought this guy's not going to make it. When I announced $500 million investment in 5 years, they must have all taken impossible, not going to happen. But we did like the end. So I think there was this mindset, just a disturbance and not going to make it. And imagine the time, 98, semiconductor industry was bleeding and all sorts. So many did not believe that a new player can come in. There were the other players can come in and win. But we were entrepreneurs. We were different from many of them, right? So,
do you feel there were preferential treatments in any way in terms of whether it was getting grants?
Oh, I had to buy a commercial building, pay commercial rent.
Yes. Completely
on commercial terms, no preferential treatment at all.
Yeah.
You go in, you can do the research. I'm sure they got a lot of preferential. I almost acquired, when I did my second company, the former National Semiconductor in Singapore, Toa Payoh plant. Very big plant. They wanted to exit Singapore. I think the US government was telling you, bring back everything, then we'll excuse all the tax. There was something like that. So they were ready to go, and we were at the due diligence stage.
Yeah.
When I did the due diligence, I found out that their annual rent was $2 per year.
Oh.
I was paying $1 million per year on my rent. So, to be fair, to attract them, they get good deal, and they continue to get good deal if they can negotiate. Micron, for example, right? So. So the playing field was definitely uneven in many areas, grants and all, uneven. So to survive that was not an easy thing, but you really have to be determined and find a way to survive. Yeah. Do better than the rest, which is what we did.
It's, I think, the testament to you in terms of laying the foundation as to why UTAC continues to persist today. Because I think, for instance, Stats was eventually sold off, and the transaction actually to sell it off was interesting because it was really the fourth largest player by revenue back then. And the buyout offer was actually from a Chinese state-backed player, which was sixth largest. So ordinarily, I think in normal circumstances, the reverse would be happening, right? Which is the larger player buying the smaller player. Furthermore, around I think 70% of the revenue at that time was from the US. So it's not that there was a limitation in terms of the local market, in terms of what Stats could grow to be. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more about what could have been the rationale for something like this happening? And you mentioned previously that one consideration was, I think, the semiconductor industry was maybe not really sexy already. Do you think that this was actually the main driving factor behind why stats were sold off, or could there have been other considerations?
Yeah. Well, another thing that happened in Singapore, and Temasek went from an investor in companies to a financial investor, almost like the GIC model. I spoke about it in Parliament. If you dig out my speeches, that we need to have Temasek 2 that will focus on investing in companies rather than become a financial advisor. So if you look at the structure of Temasek today, many of the people in key positions, they're all financial players. They are not people who... Now, Temasek has lots of funds that's supposed to invest in this thing, but I think at the higher level, they are a financial player, just like GIC. They have become almost like that. That was a transformation that happened around that time. So that was another thing. Do we invest in more in companies, or do we just become a financial investor? And they did mess up. They went to invest in the telco in Thailand that was Taksin, and they messed up down there, right? Taking majority share. So they were financial player, advised by maybe don't know who, but then they made the decisions were quite different from the days when Goh Keng Swee and all of them built the JYM Pillay built Singapore Airlines. Different consideration. They were building future companies, but then I think Temasek today is financial investor. Yeah, that's a change.
If let's say you were, I think whether you were on a Temasek capacity or if let's say you were heading stats, what would you have done differently? Would you have tried to acquire maybe UTAC?
Yes, right, because we were we were doing very well, and we were not that big, right? So acquire UTAC. There were others available for acquisition also, and so I think that acquire, invest more rather than invest less. I think that would have been the right strategy.
It's a really important point that you raised in terms of Temasek shifting from, I think, a grower of homegrown companies towards one which is more like trying to maximize financial returns. How do you think that this affected all these homegrown companies that even, let's say like Stats or like CSM or other homegrown companies that they actually manage? How do you think that this changes the dynamic a lot?
It does change the dynamic because they are looking at financial parameters rather than long-term strategic goals. So to create a future multinational may need a 10 to 15 years horizon. And but 10 to 15 horizon in a financial space, maybe they want to have X number of returns by maybe a period of time. So I think the considerations will be quite different.
Yeah.
So versus, let's say, if you go back to the days when we started all our Singapore-based GLCs, was that they were creating something that was needed, a telco, an airline, an engineering company.
Yes.
And so they were looking at creating some value, But if you're a financial player, you don't look at those things anymore. You just look at the overall sense of whether can I get the kind of returns that I need to get.
Yeah.
So the thinking will be quite different. So now I know Temasek has got a number of funds that are supposed to invest in startups and companies, but I don't know how they are performing. No visibility. My sense is, it depends on who's managing this thing. You may or may not see a big investment. To be fair, I'm not paying attention, so they may have got some great investments that they did. I know that they invest in companies that are already successful, Grab and all these other players. Temasek puts a lot of money down there, but they did not put anything when they were in very early stages. Did not bet on them early. You bet on winners, so-called, who are already winners. You do not bet on someone who could become a winner in the future. I think that is a mindset right now.
You mentioned about how with a very pioneer generations of leaders, let's say you talk about SIA or NOL or these other companies which just started, there was almost like a mentality of win the category at all costs. Of course, I mean, with certain amount of financial kind of like limit, because I think Lee Kuan Yew said that you either make SIA successful or we'll shut it down, right? So there's almost a founder mentality there, which is that we need to win this. And I think the alternative here is that there's almost a financial management, portfolio optimization kind of approach. How do you think that this, I guess, contradiction can almost be balanced today?
Very hard to say. I think we need to look at who were the people who made that shift, who were in charge at that point of time, what were their considerations. It could also be government's influence that we need to have certainty of returns so that we can, finance the future. So I think that would be a lot of government thinking, and then who was in charge of it probably made that decision. So for many years in Parliament, actually, if you refer to my speech, I talk about Temasek too. So I said Temasek now has become like a GIC.
Yeah.
It's okay. I mean, that's a government strategy. But now we need one more player that's independent of Temasek,
right,
to be investing in the future generation. We never did it. What the government did was put funds under Temasek.
Yes.
So when the parent is a financial player,
Yeah.
then it's a different thing. That's why I wanted a separate entity that managed by a different group of people, not influenced, and they are allowed to take risks.
Yes.
If they had done that, I think maybe it would have been a bit different.
What was the response like when you raised this up in Parliament? Because if you're Temasek and you're managing like a few hundred
They didn't like
billion-
it, right? They didn't like it. So what they felt, no, Temasek is capable of doing this. I didn't believe it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the same way that I mentioned earlier on when we started, EDB was in charge of multinationals,
Yes.
but they were also in charge of certain sectors, so semiconductor.
Yeah.
I'm a local player, I wanted support. A multinational got the support. I could not get the kind of support because the mentality was, I support this,
Yes.
and I don't, this one not so important, because when I can get big companies to set up down here, employ 2,000 people,
Yeah.
it's a very big achievement.
Yep.
When I work on a UTAC that may fail,
Yeah.
if we fail, I will be questioned on my judgment. I think this is a mentality that played out.
If you're Temasek, you're managing a few $100 billion. Even if, let's say, you have a new company that becomes, let's say, unicorn, right? 1 billion is a drop in the ocean compared to the vast amount they're managing. So I'm curious, like, what were the kind of responses they gave back to you that try to assure you that?
No, they say, we've got funds and we're going to invest. So if you go back at the responses that I got in Parliament, would have been like that. They will do it. They will invest. They'll invest.
I see.
But let's see. I mean, I'm not watching the scene in the last 10 years after I left Parliament. Whether did they invest in very, very companies that could be like a UTAC?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. I've not seen, but maybe they have.
You mentioned in other interviews, for instance, like let's say we had NETS, which was far ahead of other countries. And I think you mentioned that when you talk about mobile money, Kenya, I think, was one of the first to implement it, I think, back in 2007. And when we dig into the history of Singapore, there were many, many things that were far ahead. Even, let's say, EasyLink, when the idea of tap and go, that was really far and radical in its day. And you also mentioned that Singapore was one of the first few to talk about smart city and smart nation. So you were actually involved in, I think, politics even back then. What do you think led to those BOBATS initiatives being taken? And do you still feel that that's the case today?
So I think the ideas are all great ideas, and also some of them were very successful. But the world has moved ahead very fast.
Yeah.
So you look at mobile money. Kenya started 2007, M-Pesa. You go to China today, they don't accept dollars and cash anymore,
sure.
right? So it's all WeChat, what kind of mobile money.
Yeah.
We are not there yet. Correct or not? So I think we are great on ideas. I think our weakness is implementation is not that great. So then the question is, who are the people who are implementing these things? Come back to the same thing, right? Who has influence over this kind of industries? It all goes back to government.
I see.
Right? So if you look at, like, UTAC was completely private sector. We just moved on our own. No matter what we say about the Taiwanese, they were gung-ho, willing to take risks.
Yeah.
When I wanted to buy the 400,000 square feet building, the board members who are from Singapore said, don't do it, it's too big for you. Taiwanese told me, I told them I can buy it for the same price if I buy 250,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Taiwanese told me, Inderjit, don't worry, you go for it, we'll support. So that's a mindset.
Yes.
Different, right? So I think this is something that we have to develop if we really want to win.
I think there were a number of policies that you stood up against, like this is streaming, COE, population white paper, and even things like leave upgrading. And I think in your other interviews, you mentioned that during your tea session with the PAP back in 1991, you went on an attack of government policy, even though other candidates at the time were sharing about how good the policies were. And in the final interview, you mentioned how you did not lose the debate with Lee Kuan Yew. If you don't mind sharing, like, what were some of these points of contention?
Inderjit, before politics, in politics, after politics, the same person. I say and do what I believe in.
Yeah.
Sincerely, not just to show,
For sure.
So when I went for Tea Party, I could not just go and praise a policy that is from I was a grassroots leader, by the way.
Yeah.
I spent 13 years in Siglap, helping the MP down there. So I was very close to the ground.
Yep.
I knew the ground reality. So based on ground realities, I understood that some things did not work. So when we came to policy, I just spoke my mind. So it was not for the sake of just criticizing, right?
For sure.
One of the principles I followed throughout my career in politics was constructive criticism.
Yes.
You want to criticize, but have you got an idea that's better?
Yep.
So this is something that that was what I went through during all the selection process. Final one is done by the CEC. So when I went down there, the whole maybe 15 or 16 ministers and MPs were there. So I was facing the Prime Minister, which is Goh Chok Tong.
Yeah.
This side was Lee Hsien Loong, and this side was Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah.
So the first person who asked the question was Lee Hsien Loong.
Yeah.
He said, Inderjit, is there a policy that you think we can change?
Yeah.
You know which policy I told him needs to change?
Was it the COE? I think
COE.
you mentioned.
I told him the CO policy needs to change. And I explained why. Then he asked me, can you give me a better suggestion?
Yeah.
I'm on the spot with so many people. I say, I can't give you now.
Yeah.
I'll go back and email to you my recommendation or what. And which I did, by the way, after that.
Yeah.
Then there were many other questions that were asked. Lee Kuan Yew asked, first he asked me, one of the questions was, what is the value of being a Singaporean? Then I explained, I told him, I gave him a story. I said, I traveled a lot for my work. I went to Rome. When I went to the airport, I was queuing up the immigration. The immigration officers pulled me out, sent me to a room. And I went into the room, I saw a whole bunch of Indians and Africans in the room. And I asked the officer, why? He said, no, you just wait.
Yeah.
Then I took out my Singapore passport. I'm a Singaporean.
Yeah.
Oh, Singaporean. Then I went up. And I said, reputation.
Yeah.
And many years later, Lee Kuan Yew gave a talk to unionists. Next day, I read the newspaper.
Yeah.
He had the newspaper reported a person lying with a turban on a flying carpet holding a Singapore passport. He told my story to the unionists about the value of the Singapore passport.
Yeah.
So that was one of them. Then he asked me about challenges Singapore is going to face, what we should focus on, and who are going to be our competitors. And so I shared with him which country we should worry about. I actually at that time Thaksin was running Thailand, and I was doing business on behalf of TI in Thailand and educated people, good infrastructure, good capability. And I told him I wouldn't worry about the ones near us. Their system does not work. But Thailand is something that we need to worry about. Oh. And for China, I say China is not a competitor. They are someone so big that we cannot even, we collaborate, right? We don't compete. Yeah. And so these are the kind of questions that, okay, very good question. Oh. When I went for the interview, there were three of us, two of them in front of me, I was the last. Each one of them about 5-8 minutes they came out.
Yeah.
So I thought, 5-8 minutes, simple interview. I think mine would have been 3/4 1 hour. I can't remember exactly now. When I came out from the room, I was so happy. I say, I got a chance to debate with Lee Kuan Yew.
Yeah.
Whether PAP selects me or does not matter to me. This was a good experience for me. That was what I thought. Yeah.
What were you debating with him about?
All these things about passport, about challenges for Singapore, who our competitors are, and so on. So, I mean, the fact that you could address his questions without being challenged aggressively by him, because if he gets aggressive, you're finished. So I realized one thing. Why did the candidates before me take 5 minutes or 8 minutes? Yeah. As they were answering the question, he's just observing. He doesn't bother. If he finds that it's not worth his time asking your question, he will not ask a question. So they came out very fast. Yeah. Then those who wanted, he engaged. Then that took a lot of time. He took the longest time in asking questions.
I see.
That is how he worked at that time.
That was a very memorable encounter.
It was.
I think throughout your time in politics and as an MP, you have a deep conviction on how to build a better Singapore. And you believe that long term, if you rely on multinationals, the economy actually suffer because once they move out, either because of geopolitics or cost, politically, what structural barriers do you see that stop Singapore from making that transition towards trying to build more local companies?
You must believe in your local entrepreneurs. Until today, I still see some good companies that struggle to raise funds here in Singapore. And then I would say, we really need to handhold some of them, those who have potential to grow. We should not overdo because we create weak companies. Professor Wong Po Kam from NUS once wrote an article about creating zombie companies. The government gives so much of support, they become weak companies. So I think, how to find a way to support. I believe that instead of giving the funds to VCs, which we did, was a good thing. The government should have a fund that is managed by private sector players who have the heart for Singapore. Gather a few people. And we did it for a while. Spring Seeds was a seed fund. I was chairman of the investment committee. We had 2 or 3 civil servants, but we had banker, we had VCs. And so government fund let us decide what to invest. There was another fund after the seed stage. I pushed the government for many years in Parliament. Growth fund, growth enterprise fund. We could invest up to $10 or $15 million for companies that cannot get funding from any VCs anymore. But we believe can grow. And then this committee, I was chairing that committee also. Again, the same composition.
I see.
I think we can do something like that. There's a lot of government money. But the problem with government money is that Ministry of Finance must not expect that everything must come with a return. That you must be prepared that there will be losses also. But if you bet on some good ones, some will be like a VC mentality. The good ones will really become very good for Singapore, but then you lose a lot also when you do that. When it's a government fund, they dare not do that. So how do you manage? That's why they gave it to VCs to manage, and they are not. But I think we need to bring it back, to be able to do create the future multinationals of Singapore. And then I also talked about this before, that Singapore rules mainly are designed as MNC-friendly rules. That sometimes can be very difficult for smaller companies to navigate. If you reverse and we create SME-friendly rules and regulations, very easy for MNCs to also follow. Over time, we did do some work. I remember I was on this pro-enterprise panel, headed by Mr. Lee Seong Guan, Chief of Civil Service, pro-enterprise panel. Idea was look at all the rules and regulations. Anyone has complained, we will look and we help try to change. It was a great committee. I think they may still have it. So they did attempt to do some of these things, but I think we limited success, some success. A lot more can be done in this way to change the whole environment so that it becomes friendly for small and medium enterprises.
Do you have example in terms of what rules, for instance, that comes to mind that are most pertinent that benefits MNCs over?
I give you a couple of examples. One of it was indoor swimming pool. You need to have anything indoor need a fire sprinkler, right?
Yes.
Indoor swimming pool. And there was a rule that requires that. And so we managed to change that rule. There's another very interesting one. See what happens, we get feedback from industry and then we address it. So we at that time when we started, we did not think about what we should change, but they need to feedback. Another one was the F&B industry. Bar top dancing was illegal in Singapore. And the F&B industry came to us and say, why not? Why don't we allow? So the pro-enterprise panel wrote to the chief of Singapore Police. The police say, but there's a rule. Then we wrote back, we invited him for an interview, and we say, why can't we change the rule? If it's a rule, cannot, but let's change the rule. The rule got changed after some time.
I see.
There's another example of NEA requiring multiple licenses for a restaurant to get these licenses. How can we streamline so that it's simple? So we changed many. During my time, I think I spent about 6 or 7 years on the pro-enterprise panel. I did not wait for feedback. I decided to organize industry visits, dialogue with different industry groups, gather feedback, 15, 20, come back and we address. So I did. So during that time, because I was on Springboard, I could do this, and I was also on the panel. About 2,000 rules were changed or eliminated just by that exercise.
I see.
So that was very good. So we need to continue to do things like this.
Imagine that there are people who feels that the MNC approach is still a very solid way going forward, especially as Singapore tries to position itself as a very neutral ground considering the geopolitical context. Like what do you say to people that believe in this view?
Well, Trump has told us, right? He's forcing companies to move back to US. There will be more leaders like that who will come and say, bring it back. And when that happens, if many of them go back together, we'll be in trouble. Right? Because that has been a bedrock of our economic policy since industrialization until today. So just hope that it does not happen so rapidly that we cannot make a switch. But I think we already seen the signs of it, that they are pulling back. Semiconductor companies have to move back to US, and car manufacturers we don't have these, but some of them will move. And when pharmaceutical, he's going to push for move back. Right? And US can do it with technology today. Manpower cost is not so important anymore, right? And that's why I recommended manufacturing in Singapore,
Yeah.
that we can still do it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we are very lucky it's not happened, but I think you don't know what kind of leaders are going to come in the future. Things may change. And are we ready for that change? This is something that we have to think about.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, I think, on this, whether you feel that because you were running UTAC back then and you had a business that if, let's say, anything goes wrong in the political realm, that you can potentially go back to your business. Do you feel that that gave you potentially more latitude to be outspoken on these issues?
No, because I had two, I won't name them, two very well-known politicians, one very high up in office. He told me, you take care of your own career. Don't depend on politics for your career. You never know when you have to leave. So for me, this politics was national service, not career.
Yep.
If I wanted that to be my career, I would have been a yes man and would have done a lot more things, have political office. But for me, it was just a national service. I had no doubts, that this is important for me, and this is a duty I'm doing to the country.
Yeah,
that was my mindset.
Yeah.
So it was not whether if I fail here I go back. No, it's not that. I looked at it when I was asked to stand for election.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, I'm already doing national service as a grassroots leader.
Yeah.
As an MP, I can do more for the country.
Yeah.
Just more than what I was already doing. So I was already doing something I can do more, and I'll take the opportunity if I get elected that I will do more for the country as my service to the country. That was my mindset all along.
Yeah.
And so when I thought that I have done enough after 20 years, I decided to step down. I was not asked to leave.
Yep.
I decided to step down. Prime Minister wanted me to call me for lunch when I had told him and he tried to convince me to stay one more term.
Yeah.
But I managed to convince him to let me go. So I thought I've done enough. Someone else should do the next phase.
As Singapore evolves across the years, I think earlier we touched upon the idea of, let's say, when we look at the past, I think there were very radical decisions being taken in terms of, let's say, when you mentioned that, let's say, nets, for instance, and you mentioned about how it's really important in terms of whether you have the good implementers there. And I think that one other dynamic here is also you being a founder of, let's say, UTAC. You also have the legitimacy to be able to make drastic moves, considering that you are the founder. Do you feel that given the current state in which Singapore is in, I mean, now we are many, many generations away from the very founding generation, do you feel that the space in which political leaders have to be able to make major adjustments does shrink over time?
It does, because lack of experience. If you look at the political office holders and look at their background, their experience is limited to governance and to policies and so on. They may not fully understand the private sector. Richard Hu was from the private sector, from Shell.
Yes.
Heng Swee Keat was willing to listen. I think Raymond Lim was private sector, I believe, when he came in, willing to listen. So I think as long as you have people like that, I think we'll be okay. But if let's say you have people who have always, their whole political career was in government first, civil servant, in the military, and then they become, and they and that's all, and they don't understand the rest, they're in trouble. But I want to say that some of our current political leaders who are ministers are good listeners also. They understand, they're willing to listen, but not all. Yeah, we need more of them like that.
And I think that this idea about listening is a really important skill. It's almost like an art as well. And how do you actually get good feedback from the ground? You mentioned that good leaders, as well as I guess previous generations of PAP leaders, including some select ones today, have a knack of getting in. Could you elaborate more on this? Like, how do you see previous generation leaders being able to solicit such good feedback and being able to implement them?
As MPs, when I was in Ang Mo Kio, in Kebun Baru, I did lots of block parties. My block parties, not parties, dialogue sessions.
Yeah.
I sit down with a group of officers from the various agencies and with my residents, and I free flow. I listen. But I don't set the agenda. But I've seen some of my colleagues who sat down there and they were just one way. I'm explaining to you. But I reverse and I say, I'm going to listen to you. If I can answer, if not, then we'll go back and change and we come back and we'll answer. And I always went back and put a notice board what we have done based on the feedback. So you have to be accountable, not just go down there, listen and then don't do anything. Right? So you're accountable and show your accountability. I think we can get that done. Will be very good. Some did it, some did not. So I think listening is when you have an opportunity, you actually see how can you make it better, rather than to say no. But then this work, and I give you one. So 2011 election was a very bad one for us.
Yeah.
At that time, the new batch of third G leaders came in, 3G leaders. And so they were in charge of Post-Mortem.
I see.
And they went to different they came to Amokyo. Of course, PM could not make it. I was there with other MPs. And so this group of young ministers, we lost votes because we need to explain our policies better. I say, wait a minute. I stopped them and they were ministers. I say, no, you got it wrong. Your job now is to see what can I do policy-wise so that 5 years from now, they feel that their life has gotten better from the last 5 years. And do that rather than just explaining obviously the policies, did not make their life better. That's why they didn't vote for us, right? So the mentality is very important. If you just explain, that's not listening, right? You want to find out why.
Yeah.
Then do something about it. So I think that it has to be two-way thing, not one way.
Point that you're on in terms of this two-way thing, it requires, I think, people whoever are in charge to not have groupthink. And you also touched on an earlier point about how there is a certain background in terms of the composition of people who are leading Singapore. Do you feel that what is necessary to be able to, remedy these situations to get more commercially minded people within government?
I think so. But then, we got one good chap in Parliament right now as a minister, Tan See Leng. I know him quite well. He was my resident doctor, an entrepreneur.
I see.
Then ran a big hospital.
Yeah.
But not many. And I think the culture is such that many private sector people probably will not feel comfortable in a system that is dominated by people of the same background and the same system. So I don't think so they're able to attract many private sector people into government, into political office. It's sad. I think they should. Richard Hu came, a few people came, but then not many. So I think this is something that they need. The leaders need to understand why. Why are all of them just from one background, but not getting enough diversity? I was so happy when Tan See Leng got into Parliament.
Like, what do you reckon is actually the obstacle in terms of getting? I think ministerial pay is one major issue. The idea of MPs getting a lot of scrutiny in terms of every single thing that you do, the loss of privacy.
Yeah, I think these are all factors, and one of it, the scrutiny is, especially with social media. It's lose your privacy, your family loses privacy. I think this is a factor. I think salary, people at Tan See Leng, he's made his money, so he doesn't. So you want to bring in people who are really successful and don't need the minister's salary. They see it as a service, a duty rather than as an income generating, and who want to contribute. I think you have to get that right kind of people. Most of them will not be young. They will, See Leng is about 60 right now, I think. Yeah. So it's okay to get people like that, but who are willing to come in and change. But then they must feel comfortable that they will have influence over policies. If they come in down there and they try to change and the civil service refuses to make any headway on, then the word will get out. And the rest will say, why waste my time? I myself spend my time on other things.
If, let's say, someone were to join, I think, politics, and the relationship between the political office holders as well as civil servants, have you seen the dynamics of this evolve over time in any way?
Very hard for me to say because I was never in political office. My involvement with them would have been dialogue sessions and so on. Yeah, I made a speech after the 2011 election about policy making. One of my characteristics was that, a lot of policies that we make are bottoms up rather than tops down. Yeah. Compared to the first generation leaders going to say, I want this to be done, come up with a policy. Yeah. He doesn't like it, he threw it back and then he comes back. Right? But now my impression, again, I may be wrong, is that civil servants come up with the policies, float it up to the minister. Yeah. I don't know how much debate goes on down there and how much debate goes on in cabinet and the policies get passed. Yeah. I worry about that kind of a process where is there enough political judgment injected into policy making. If it's top down, it's political judgment, but if bottoms up, then and you don't debate that much, you may just go up without. And that's where the implementation part comes in. You may not be able to implement it effectively, and people don't see the effect.
You did touch upon this, I think, as a post-mortem for the 2011. I think there was this YouTube speech in which you gave this diagnosis.
There was a party conference.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what was the response like to I think, this feedback?
I think the political leaders were unhappy with me. I was in Ecuador for some work that I was doing down there on behalf of government.
Yeah.
And I got a call from Heng Swee Keat and says the party wants you to speak at the conference.
Yeah.
I declined. I said, no, I don't want to speak. Let someone else speak.
Yeah.
Then after a couple of days, I got the call, no, we want you to speak. I say, if I speak, I'm going to speak my mind.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say good things, I'll speak my mind and I'll give my analysis.
Yeah.
And he was kind enough saying, yes, you just one thing you need to note, that is never a closed door session. You will get out, whatever you say will get out. Yeah. So up to you to decide what you have to say.
Yeah.
So I went there and I made that speech. I made my analysis of what went wrong. And this is also the thing I talk about, policy, improve people's life. Yeah. I think I must have said it in that speech also.
Yeah.
And about bottoms up versus top down policy making.
Yes.
Yeah, and about more political injection into policies. Yeah, more political judgment injection. Yeah, so that was the context of that speech.
Yeah.
And I reluctantly gave that speech. No choice. I was party leaders,
Yeah. And I think that this is very important because maybe I can quote from you as well. I think there was this interview that you gave many, many years back. Every time I challenged the ministers, they came back with a sledgehammer. And I know where the sledgehammer was coming from. It was coming from the civil servants because civil servants are there to defend the policies. And I think you on the receiving end of that, like, what was that like? And do you feel that that continues to persist you throughout your time in as an MP?
Of course. I mean, I give you an example. I made a speech, I coined this term, growth at all costs economic policy.
Yeah.
And I challenged the government. I said, we must inclusive and, we cannot do this, people will suffer and so on.
Yeah. And
it came back with a sledgehammer. And that's the two ministers who came back with the sledgehammer were none other than Lee Hsien Loong. He was my partner in Ang Mo Kio. Yeah. And Tharman, he was a finance minister at that point of time.
Yeah.
But I knew where that was coming from. As I say, civil servants drafted their speeches, response, right? So, but what's very interesting, I think maybe 3 or 5 years later, some years later, Robin Chan, I think is a journalist in Straits Times, he wrote a 2-page Straits Times report about how the government... So what happened was, they keep on telling me there's no way we can control growth. It has to be just grow and grow and grow.
Yeah.
So one day, I met up with our former president, before he became president, Tony Tan. He's an economist. So I asked him, can I ask you, can we manage this so that we don't grow at all costs? He said, of course we can.
Yeah.
He said, look at China, they're managing that way. So I got a lot more confidence and I continued to push that line. So anyway, this Robin Chan came and he analysed, and government actually one day changed. We will go for inclusive growth.
Yeah.
So you go and look, I think one of Tharman's speeches, he made that, inclusive growth. So they changed after many years. So he traced, Inderjit coined the term growth at all costs. At this year, this happened, all these battles, and finally government relented and changed to growth, inclusive growth.
I see.
So sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Streaming. I had the education minister who whacked me. Your definition of success is narrow. I went back and said, your definition is narrow, not mine. So we had fought so many battles, and finally they changed. The hybrid system that they have today is something that I suggested many years ago. Yeah. So I realized, when we criticize some of these policies, even if with our own ideas, the government will never say, I agree.
Yeah.
They will push back, but I think they study, and over the years, then they come, I've got this idea, I'm going to implement this thing, inclusive growth, which is my idea. Yeah. That's fine. As long as Singapore benefits, it's okay. Yeah. So that's how the system works. So I don't expect in Parliament, I say today, and especially if I criticize a policy, they will let me off easily. They won't. They surely have to defend it.
Yeah. And do you see many of these instances whereby there were contradictory opinions even within, I think, the political party itself? Because maybe I can cite one specific case that you mentioned in the interview with, I think, Mrs. Lee Bihua, where you said that you went against the Minister for National Development for lift upgrading, where the lift showed only up and down arrows without showing which floor the residents are on. And as chairman of Ang Mo Kio GRC, you rejected all lift upgrading for the GRC. And you mentioned that the big reason why this was actually resolved was because PM Lee Hsien Loong was CC'd within this entire thread, and he stepped in to say that it cannot be this expensive to make those changes. Are such incidents common when you went against ministers?
No, why I copied the Prime Minister was because it's Ang Mo Kio.
Yes.
I'm rejecting all of the lift upgrading. And if let's say Ang-Mo-Kio does not get lift upgrading, he will be in trouble, I'll be in trouble also. Now let's not get angry. So it's not that I used him, just I had to keep him appraised on what I'm doing.
For sure.
And fortunately, he believed in what I thought, and that helped after some time change to that got and the good news was that not only did we get the correct type of leaf numbers in Ang-Mo-Kio, MND decided that they will, even those other precincts that already had it, they go back and change back. So the whole of Singapore benefited from that.
Yeah. And required someone like you to be willing to.
I mean, if you do not challenge, before Ang-Mo-Kio, there were others already had it, and we heard about the rumblings at residents. Or I don't know where the unhappy, but no one really challenged, right? So I did not want to let it go.
Yeah.
So, but I could have let it go and say, why you become the bad guy, and just be nice to everyone. They'll be nice to me. If that had happened, maybe Singapore would have just a kind of up-down arrow. So as I say, for me, I believe I was fighting not for myself. I'm not living, in a multi-story building, but I was fighting for my residents. What is right, not what is popular.
Yeah. I think you tread always a very delicate line in terms of any kind of pushbacks or criticism. And I think that after 2011 election, for instance, I think you shared about how you were giving feedback to the PM, PM Lee Hsien Loong at that time, that his father's style was autocratic. PM Goh Chok Tong's style was consultative. You said that his style was more distributed and that he should pull it in a little bit. How do you arrive at diagnosis like this? And do you believe that this style was suitable for Singapore in its next phase?
Where did you read that?
I think you mentioned this on the Rise Media interview.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, okay. Yeah, I mean, because I was with him from 93.
Yes.
I was with him. And then when he became Prime Minister in 2004, so I observed it very, and I became a grassroots leader in 1984.
Yeah.
While Lee Kuan Yew was still the Prime Minister. Then Goh Chok Tong became Prime Minister when I became an MP. And then he was, so I observed, because I was observing their styles, right?
Yeah.
So I think clearly we can see Lee Kuan Yew top down, Goh Keng Swee, those kind of people, right?
Yeah.
Then Goh Chok Tong changed the whole style to consultative. So very obvious, people saw that.
Yeah.
And then I think, his style was, I trust these fellas. So my point to him was, if they're all not as good as you, you better be careful. You have to bring it a bit in, and then don't completely. One person does a bad job, all of us going to suffer.
Yeah,
that was my main point.
Yes.
Yeah, but thanks. He was a listener, right? He did not scold me for being so direct with him. Many occasions that I was direct with him, and I think he appreciated my feedback.
Yeah.
He knew that it was nothing personal or nothing for my personal gain also. So I had a good relationship. Till now, I still have a good relationship with him.
You did mention in other interviews as well that in certain cases whereby you criticize certain policies and all this, the minister, for instance, came back with the sledgehammer. And sure, maybe some of it was the civil servants, but there will also be, I guess, some personal egos that were hurt by, I think, your feedback.
Yes.
How do you find a way to tread this balance? And do you feel that it is still possible? How easy is it to do something?
I think if, let's say, I went with the attitude that, I need to be in politics and I better don't ruffle feathers, then I would have been very worried. But if, let's say, I went with, I want to change and I have to speak up to change, even if, let's say, at a personal expense, then I have to pay that price. Yep. That was my attitude.
Yeah.
So I had lots of, in Parliament and also behind the scenes also, lots of these things that I did that, because I believed in it. And I had to say what is correct rather than what is popular. So that was the principle that I followed.
Maybe we can move on a bit towards entrepreneurship, right? How do you feel that Singapore can nurture more entrepreneurs like yourself? And I think just now you mentioned people like Simon Hu.
I think we have made good progress. So ACE, Action Community for Entrepreneurship, lasted about 10, 12 years. Our goal was just to transform the environment.
Yeah.
In culture, in education, in rules and regulation, and in financing.
Yeah.
Each one of us did different things. So I did on finance and overall. I think we made very good progress in changing. So today you see many young are willing to start companies. In the past, I just want to work for multinational.
Yeah.
So it's down there. Financing, I mentioned, we have improved quite a lot. May not be perfect yet, but then I think we are better.
Yeah.
Connectivity, if you think Singapore as a market, I think it's too small.
Yeah.
But ASEAN is there, Southeast Asia, our connectivity. So we have all the ingredients. I think we just have to be patient but I think support, belief in your entrepreneurs and give them support and guidance, mentorship, and help with the networks. I give you an example of I was helping a company, advising them. This was a startup doing some projects in Vietnam, great technology, competing with a big GLC in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Not great technology, the GLC.
Yeah.
GLC went to the customer and said, no, this is a small company, they will collapse.
Yeah.
Don't work with them, work with me.
Yeah.
If I would have taken the approach, I'm a GLC, I go to this, why don't you work your technology, my strength, but no, it's to kill. So that one I think was quite sad, that. So we must believe and must work together rather than try. So the Taiwanese are good at this, the Japanese, they go in a group.
Oh.
We need to also develop that, especially our GLCs. They bully sometimes, not all, but some do. Yeah. So they have to give that mothership effect that I can help these companies. I don't think so. We have developed that mentality, especially in the GLCs.
Entrepreneurs who are starting out need to be aware of some of these dynamics, right? Because, for instance, you mentioned that Singapore is too small of a market for, I think, a lot of things that people might want to do. And as the startup ecosystem grows more and more mature, there's actually discussions a lot about this in terms of the VCs not being able to give back enough returns to the LPs. The market, even may look at the entire ASEAN region, is still much smaller than even Guangdong or Shanghai combined. So in this case, is that we shouldn't aim for unicorn status, right? We should maybe be, below a unicorn, but in terms of that scale. Are there anything that, in terms of advice that you give to an entrepreneur who is starting out? They're starting out in Singapore.
Think global day one. Global, can be big region or can be the whole world. Think global. So UTAC and Infiniti, I started all global. I mean, I did not think about just serving as the market around me, but the global market. My customers came from Japan, from US.
Yeah.
So think global right from day one, and you need to have a diversified team that has got the experience working in these regions.
Yeah.
I think many of our Singaporeans, we comfort zone, right? We have not had that experience, and I think need to build a diversified enough team, even if to bring from outside.
Yeah.
So I think you think the global day one, diversify, and then get smart money.
Yes.
And you have to get the right partners because VCs can be destructive if, let's say, you can't gel.
Yeah.
And so you really need to be very careful. Don't jump at the first sign of money that comes your way. I think if you can do these things, a global day one, great team, smart money, I mean, it's a formula. But also, of course, don't be a copycat entrepreneur.
Yeah.
If, let's say, you are just same as another, don't do it. But you have a great idea, you can put a great team together, then something different. And it doesn't have to be rocket science. So Grab was not rocket science. Grab was a copy of Uber, but regional play. Uber is not rocket science. Algorithms, but it's different business model. Airbnb is algorithm, not rocket science. So I give you a simple example. In Singapore, I have a coffee shop. The coffee shop will remain a coffee shop for a long time.
Yeah.
In US, there's a coffee shop. The coffee shop became Starbucks.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
So that kind of mentality, you must say, how can you look at a business model that you must be able to expand quickly if you want to become a big company, but you can do step by step. No. Yeah.
I think since you're lab politics, one major topic that you've been trying to champion as well is the idea of reindustrializing Singapore. I think when you're talking about industrial policy, I think when you talk about other countries, there's two popular ways to go about doing it. I think there's a more centralized model, and there's almost the German Mittelstand like model, right, whereby you have a lot more small shops. Do you think that Singapore's manufacturing model can fit within any of these two models?
No, I think we are largely multinational based right now, or GLC based. So we don't have that small. We have some, I would say, to be fair, some good middle companies, how to make them into multinational. I think that should be a focus. And then for startups that can become the future multinational, I think that should also be something that we must believe. Industrialization, at that time when I started UTAC, many people believe that manufacturing in Singapore is dead. I believe that we can do it with technology of that time.
Yeah.
And so I went on, and today, 20 years later, it's still around.
Yeah.
So it can be done. And I still believe that, we can do manufacturing in Singapore. and I looked at our economic model. We were 30% manufacturing. We are down to less than 20% right now. But you look at Taiwan and Korea, they are about 25-30%.
Yeah.
So I actually wrote a paper, right, a white paper on bringing back manufacturing to Singapore.
Yes.
So the idea is that manufacturing jobs create a lot other more ancillary jobs. Service jobs only create service jobs, but not many. So if you can have manufacturing as a base, you will create many other value-added jobs in Singapore.
Yeah.
That was my main idea. And so bring back manufacturing,
Yeah.
bring it up to at least 25%, and then, I think we can create a dynamic economy. Now, but is manufacturing still viable? Those days I felt was viable idea, but today, what are the costs in manufacturing? Land costs,
Yeah.
utility costs,
Yeah.
manpower costs.
Yeah.
Manpower I can solve by AI and robots.
Yeah.
Land costs I can go up, but Singapore government maybe needs to put in a differentiated pricing policy for industries, right? And then utility and so on. I think we are very expensive compared to others. I think this problem needs to be solved. But at least the labor cost and labor availability is no longer a big problem.
Yeah.
Right? So I think we put all the technologies together. We can do some amount of high-end manufacturing, very large scale, still in Singapore.
Yeah.
But my suggestion was prototyping. Government every year spends billions of dollars on R&D with our research institute, with the universities and so on. Many of this R&D just sits on shelves, not commercialized. But if you take the research from the universities and the research institute and bring it to industry, it's not going to work, not ready yet. So you cannot bring from lab to mass production. So I came up with the idea that let's bring from lab and do prototyping manufacturing. And then once prototyping is reflecting what a mass production is like. I mean, I've been from this industry, but smaller scale. Then I'm ready to go. I just need to expand the equipment and but the equipment design is all ready. So do prototype, and then the manufacturing can be done in Singapore, can be done in any part of the world. Maybe our special economic zone in Johor may be a good place, or US or China, wherever.
Yeah.
But when you control from lab to mass production, you control the manufacturing capability and the IP involved in manufacturing, the processes.
Yeah.
And every time a new product comes out, you are the first one.
Yeah.
And you remain in control. Singapore can be the center of manufacturing for globally, I would say, if you become prototyping hub. That is my idea. And I experimented with it when I started my second company, Infiniti Solutions. I had a prototyping facility in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Mass production in the Philippines, design center in India. Singapore HQ. And we had this model worked.
Yeah.
So we could do here in Singapore, and there's lots of IP. Now we need to focus on how to bring it to production. It doesn't go to industry because the prototyping stage is missing.
And what do you feel is needed in terms of policy to be able to effect something like this?
So one of it is going to be differentiated pricing, because if let's say that as a prototyping facility I fail because my cost is expensive and I cannot utility, there needs to be some differentiated pricing. If what I will do, I would say that if Taiwan electricity is $1 per kilowatt, and mine is $5, I bring down to $2, or maybe not $5. Industrial land. If go to commercial, it's going to be $10 million. But I will, as JTC, I'll let you run it for a while at a lower. So bring down some of these costs that everything governments control. And then some manpower ability. I think our manpower policy are not bad. We do allow quite a good flow. Then incentives to automate and AI adoption. I think these are all there already anyway. So I think it's not much change that's needed if you want to do. And so, but agree that that manufacturing should at least be 25% of our GDP. Chan Chun Sing, when he was MTI, he read my paper. I met up with him. 6 months later, I think he announced. I mean, he must have done a lot more study than what I gave him. And he announced that they want to increase the manufacturing content of the GDP by 50%, which means they'll go to 25. There's a 10-year target that they set.
Yes.
So it can be done, and I think prototyping will be the niche. We cannot do mass production of cars and so on, no. But we can do production of the electronics that go into the car. Mass or even prototyping. So we choose the right areas. There's so many areas that we can choose. And now with the world in flux, I think there's an opportunity. I see all these challenges as opportunities.
I think always as an entrepreneur. And I think maybe just I think to end off the interview as well, I think I always like to ask my guests one last question, which is, what's your most tough love opinion / take on Singapore? What we desperately need but no one is going to like it?
The composition of our political office holders needs to change. US is the other extreme. They keep on changing, all from private sector.
Yeah.
I actually had suggested something that, if let's say the best people don't want to get into politics, why don't we have an upper house of nominated wise men? Doesn't have to be 100, can be 20. George Yeo, Tomiko, Kobunui kind of people. And appoint them as ministers like what others do. Manmohan Singh, Prime Minister of India, was not elected. He was from the upper house, but he became Prime Minister of India, and he changed India's future. So I suggested this, upper house, and some of these people, they don't like to go for elections.
Yeah.
But they are experts in their area. I think we must have a mindset change. This is one way that we can bring in people who are different from the civil servants and army officers who are in the political office. Because let's face it, even Parliament does not make decisions.
Cabinet does.
Cabinet make the decision. And we need to have more people in cabinet who have different backgrounds, different views. Then we will see real change. Yeah.
Do you feel that the MP portion of it, because now if you want to be a minister, you also need to be an MP.
Yes.
That keeps you close to the ground, which is the counterpoint to.
So you need both. So I'm not saying that every one of the minister come from upper house. Minister of Finance can come from upper house, but some others. So it's a mix. At least you have an option of bringing people who are not comfortable to fighting the elections, who can come in. But MPs play a very important role of ground feedback.
Yeah.
So not every MP is going to become a minister. I mean, I can consider myself as a grassroots MP during my 20 years.
Yeah.
I have very good feel of the ground. I have good relationship with my people, with the SME players and so on. So therefore, I knew what the issues are. We need people like that. And they also need to be listened to seriously, these MPs, when they speak. That they are important. You need to have some of the people who are current background, army officers and civil servants, to be ministers also, because they know the system. We need someone who can help the system run smoothly. Then we need the other group who are private sector, not just one, but a few, who can also contribute to a more robust environment.
I see.
That I think is a big change we have to make. I don't see our leaders willing to make any change at this point of time. Hopefully 5G may be like that.
And I hope that your wish realizes. And with that, thank you so much for coming on for the conversation, Mr. Inderjit.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.